talk a little bit more about prescription drugs right now. Prescription drug prices in 2018, Americans spent $335 billion on prescription drugs alone. That's about $60 billion more than they paid a decade ago. Senator Warren, you've called for the creation of a government-run drug manufacturer that would step in if there is a drug shortage or a price spike. Why does it make sense for the government to manufacture drugs, especially when public trust in government is near historic lows?
So where are you getting that from, Wolf Corporate Media Blitzer, about the public trust in the government being near an all-time low? I mean, I didn't hear you cite any polls or anything like that, and it's kind of a generic question when you think about the sort of government agencies that might be manufacturing drugs. Do you think that the public confidence in those government entities is that bad? For instance, an organization like the NIH, how do you think the public trust in that organization would fare compared with a corporate big pharma corporation? I think the NIH would fare rather well, don't you? In the public trust comparison. And so, kind of interesting how you phrase that question when you think about how when you think about the sort of government agency that would be involved in the manufacture of drugs and medical devices too. When you think about it, I think the public trust in an organization like government organization like the NIH would be fairly high, and especially compared with a big pharma corporation. So that really renders moot your idea, supposedly, that the public trust in government is so bad. And you think about how the public trust in, say, for instance, NASA is fairly high, given that they landed a man on the moon, something big pharma has never done. People, I think the public trust in the government agencies, when you think of it that way, is fairly high. People rely on them for regulations to keep our food supply safe, and keep the air clean, and keep air and water in the environment clean. So I think the public trust is fairly high in government agencies when you think of it that way. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the NIH, they were recently featured in an episode of 60 Minutes where they have developed a breakthrough treatment for sickle cell anemia. The NIH has. And it's like almost like it's a type of genetic engineering that the NIH came up with. They innovated. And but what was not mentioned in that episode of 60 Minutes is that the only way that drug or any other drug that's currently in a trial being researched, the only way for it to end up getting to the patient once the trial is over and has been fully approved by the FDA, the only way for that treatment to get to the patient is by way of a for-profit capitalist organization that sees it in their best selfish interests to manufacture and sell that treatment, that drug or medical device. And so we always go by this assumption that if some cure is found, then it's going to get to the patient. But that's not a safe assumption in our current system, the way it's designed. Instead, the only way it's going to get to the patient is if and only if some capitalist drug or medical device manufacturer sees it in their own best interests. They're going to make a profit off of this treatment. then they'll be able to sell it at what the market will bear, enough to see it as in their best interest to do so. So, but what I'm thinking is, why not, instead of depending on the capitalist marketplace to get these treatments to the patient, why not instead stick with an organization like the NIH, where they're already innovating and finding innovative treatment, developing innovative treatments for such diseases as sickle cell anemia. And so just eliminate the capitalist middleman, and once the treatment has been fully approved by the FDA, the NIH could be the ones that manufactures and distributes to the patients at the cost of manufacturing, not at what would be in the best interests of the corporate shareholders, as is currently the case. So, I mean, there's like this idea that the only way for innovation to happen is for these capitalist corporations to have an incentive, be incentivized by the prospect of monopoly profits brought on by patent monopolies, for them to have that reward at the end of this long, expensive ordeal of research and development. The only way for them to have the incentive to go through all that expense is for the prospect of having this monopoly profits that they can enjoy from a patent. So otherwise, where would the incentive be for them to invest in all that goes into developing these new drugs and medical devices? However, when you think about it, it's not those capitalists that are doing the innovating. It is the scientists and engineers. And the scientists and engineers that are working for a corporation, typically they give up their patent rights in exchange for a regular paycheck. So, yeah, once they do the developing, they create this new treatment that gets a patent. They do not get the scientists and the engineers doing the actual innovating. They never get to enjoy those capitalistic monopoly profits. They do not get any residuals. I think they usually get like a plaque with their name on it, but that's about it. So the motivation is still going to be the same if they're working for an organization, a government organization like the NIH. After all, the scientists, they usually go into finding these new treatments. They go into that kind of field not out of capitalistic motivations of making a fortune. Typically, they go into that field because they want to help people. They want to help the patients get better. They were never motivated by the prospect of giant mountains of monopoly profits from patents. They go into the field to help people. So, if they're going to be working for an organization, doesn't it make more sense that they work for like the government, where they can have a mandate to develop new treatments that will help the patients in the long run, rather than with a corporation where the engineers and scientists have the mandate to help the shareholders of that corporation. So they're still going to get the regular paycheck, whether they're working for a corporation, the scientists and the engineers, or the government, such as like the NIH. But if they're working for the NIH, then they can be directed to do what everybody wants them to do, to be directed, and that is to help people, help the patients, not to help shareholders. All this money that goes in, like the charities that go into helping to find these cures, people are not giving this money. They're not donating this money with the idea of helping the corporate shareholders. They're donating the money to help patients in the long run. That's why they're donating all this money. But that's the absurd thing, is that in our current system, the only way for these cures to ever get to the patients is for it to go through this sieve of the capitalist sieve that where some company decides it's in their own selfish interests to manufacture and sell this drug or medical device. It's if it's a corporation, they want to make sure it's in their shareholders' best interests. So I mean, why do we have like this system? It does not seem to make any sense. We should have a system that puts the patients first and foremost as the priority, and then maybe have a system where the maybe some capitalists can pick up the crumbs. Maybe they can make some money off of it. If they can, that's fine. As long as we put the patients at first. Now we have everything all backwards in our current system, where we put the capitalists first, and then we hope that the patients will benefit. We make the assumption that the patients are going to benefit when we're putting first priority those put to the capitalists, drug and medical device manufacturers. It really does not make any sense, and we're just making assumptions about the benefits to the patients. We go through all this scrutiny of an individual treatments, but we don't have very little scrutiny towards analyzing whether we have the best system or not for the patient's benefit. Very little scrutiny goes into that. Go to every little minutia detail in researching different treatments, but very little scrutiny to the big picture of the whole system that we're using in the medical field of healthcare. So I think what a conclusion we should reach by now is that in the realm of prescription medicine, prescription drugs and medical devices, the capitalist marketplace just does not work in terms of providing a product at a reasonable cost and a sufficient supply to the patients that need those drugs and medical devices. You compare that with the over-the-counter medicine, where it's not perfect, but it works reasonably well to provide drugs and medical devices at reasonable prices. For instance, you can get all sorts of pills and potions at not ridiculous prices, and you can buy bandages and thermometers and blood pressure monitors over at the corner drugstore for reasonable prices. But that's not the case with prescription medicine. For instance, if you're at the hospital, inpatient items are ridiculously, they cost, there's like through the roof. There's no rhyme or reason to the costs of much of prescription medicine, both medical devices, prescription medical devices, and prescription drugs, in terms of a competitive marketplace, keeping the costs down. I mean, for thing, if you're an inpatient, you're not going to have a whole lot of options, anyways, to shop around. A lot of these legislators, they say, "Oh, I'm going to try and get more generics onto the market." But it seems like that's just a matter of just like tilting at windmills. For some reason, when the realm of prescription medicine, the manufacturers always find a way to game the system so that the competitive marketplace just does not work to keep both the prices down and sufficient supplies. Instead, we have price gouging and drug shortages as a continual and perennial problem. So what I've concluded is that we should see healthcare as essentially a utility, a vital utility, just as electricity and natural gas are vital utilities. And so the correct response that has been used in the realm of regular utilities, electricity, natural gas, is to have a Public Utilities Commission to not negotiate, but dictate the price of the utility and mandate a sufficient minimum supply of that utility to the public. So the Public Utilities Commission, known by the acronym of PUC, they determine, well, this is going to be what a reasonable profit is for the energy company. Reasonable, so how much they can charge and maintain, get a reasonable profit, but not a huge profit. And then they can, so then that's what the PUC says, you can charge this much, you'll still get a reasonable profit, but you're not going to be price gouging. And you're also going to have to provide a minimum supply, so there's not going to be blackouts of the supply of the natural gas or electricity. And so that's what the PUC, the government agency, dictates. So that's what we need, something like the equivalent of that for medicine as well. However, in the realm of medicine, it may be too complex of a system for the PUC to keep track of all the thousands of different prescription drugs and medical devices. So maybe the only option will be for prescription drugs and medical devices to be manufactured, to be nationalized, to be manufactured by the government. And then the government would sell those drugs and medical devices at cost, or at no cost if the patient can't afford it. And the thing there is that patents, they're I believe that is a civil matter. So if a patent is infringed, then the infringed whoever owns the patent rights can sue the infringer of the patent. But the thing is, in the realm of the federal government, as far as I know, the government can only be sued if they agree to be sued in a civil lawsuit. So what could be the case is if the government could manufacture patent-protected drugs and medical devices where they do not own the patent rights to that drug or medical device, and just not agree to be sued by whoever does own the patent rights. So this would be just a case of putting the patients first as a first priority, which is what should be done. And if the corporations that have been developing drugs and medical devices say that, well, it's not going to be worth it anymore if we're not going to be able to enjoy the monopoly profits, well, then they could just, well, they're not going to do that anymore. And I would say, well, go ahead. That's fine. Go away. We don't need you anyway, because from now on the government can do all the research and development. This is like it's already being done at NIH and at public colleges and universities, and also private universities around the country. And then that could be just ramped up by the government. All the government research and development can be ramped up considerably to make up for any loss in the R&D done that used to be done by some big pharma corporation. Now, the government can take on that role of research and development, and they could do just fine, I think. They're already doing just fine with the R&D, and then now finally we can have the mandate of acting in the interests of the patients, which that's what should have been the case in the first place. Acting in the interest of the patients, not in the interest of the shareholders, their financial interest of the shareholders of some corporation. So once we can nationalize the production of drugs and medical devices, we could put the patients first. That's the first priority, rather than the shareholders of a corporation. This is the way it should have been in the first place. So I think that is the only solution I think is going to be feasible. I mean, I hear about these talking about being able to import drugs from other countries. So yeah, that's fine. But how can you be sure even that's a reasonable cost? It's still, I mean, even if it is, you're going to maybe get significant savings, but it still might be way more. Having to pay way more than the cost to manufacture the drug that's been imported from another country. It still might be unreasonable profit that the seller is able to enjoy. We don't. That's what needs to end. We need to have if it's going to be a private company that's manufacturing it, we need to treat them like a utility where they can only charge a reasonable profit, just as with any other like electrical or natural gas company. They can only, if they're going to be selling it, fine, but you can only charge a reasonable a profit margin. If you don't, well, the government needs to be ready to step up and manufacture that drug or medical device, and put the needs of the patients first, not the desires of the capitalists first. So that's what I'm envisioning as the way to go forward is through government manufacturing of medical devices and drugs. We've already seen the government does things just fine in the realm of such things as like the highway systems, local roads, county roads. They do just fine. Do a real good job. They did a real good job landing a man on the moon, which is still seen as the penultimate achievement, human achievement. We always say if they can land a man on the moon, then they should be able to do this or that. You know who landed a man on the moon? That was a government operation from start to finish. So one of the greatest achievements in human history was done by the U.S. government. So if we can put if the U.S. government can put a man on the moon, yes, I think they can manufacture drugs and medical devices, just as they're doing now at places like the NIH, National Institutes of Health. They're already doing it. And so we can continue to do that, but we need to do that is structurally change the system, where they're doing that from the initial idea of some new drug, medical device, or possibly look at traditional medicine, where there has not been an incentive to look at the realm of such things as herbal medicine, because herbs typically cannot be patented. So there's not the motivation for the monopoly profits of big pharma to research such traditional medicines as herbal medicine, because they cannot patent them and get the monopoly profits. But now, with the government having the mandate of looking after the patient's best interest, they can look. They can say, oh, well, let's look at maybe this herb will work better than some synthetic medicine, as some whole herb. And so then now they research that without being concerned about whether or not they'll ever be able to get monopoly profits, because now they're not concerned about that, because it's the government creating it. They'll be concerned about what's best for the patients. They're not going to be, there's no concern about whether or not they'll be able to get monopoly profits. With something like an herbal medicine, an herbal treatment, or some other could be mineral treatment or something. I don't know. So yeah, we need to put the patients first, not the capitalists first, as we now have the current system, and we're just assuming that the benefits of the patients will follow with the desires of the corporate big pharma and big medical device manufacturers. It's a very unsafe assumption. We've seen that it's very unsafe, as the capitalists have continually price gouged and caused shortages of drugs and medical devices. Very similar to the case what happened when there was lack of regulation when Enron was in charge of the supply of electricity to the state of California. Then there was price gouging on the electricity rates and continual blackouts. So that's what we're facing year after year, perennially now. What Californians faced when Enron was in charge of the electricity supply for Californians. So that's what happens. But for some reason we don't put two and two together and realize that that's what happens when you don't regulate a utility, such as whether it's electricity or healthcare. For some reason, we realize we need that kind of regulations with the Public Utilities Commission for electricity and healthcare, but for some reason we don't realize that we need that for we don't realize we need that for the utility of healthcare as well. We need to regulate the prices and only allow reasonable profits, and we need to regulate the minimum supply of those drugs and medical devices also, And if any private entity cannot meet those demands, not negotiations, those demands dictated by the Utilities Commission, Public Utilities Commission, then the government needs to be ready to step up and manufacture those drugs and medical devices. And make sure that the patients get what they need at a reasonable cost. Not go bankrupt, not have to go bankrupt. That's my thoughts on the matter. I've gone a little farther off than long than I planned on it, but I hope I provided some good insight. Thanks for listening.